Thank you, Adam. Well, my name is Tanya Haddad, and I work for the Oregon Coastal Management Program on the west coast of the USA. And one aspect of my work at the state of Oregon is technical support for the West Coast Ocean Data Portal. I'm going to speak about the data sharing via the West Coast Ocean Data Portal and about how the portal helps build relationships and provide access to coastal and ocean data. More specifically, I want to convey some sense of the behind the scenes required to support a portal composed of contributions from across a regional geography and with a wide diversity of contributing institutions. I'll also cover some of the history of the data portal and some of the lessons learned to date. I'd like to start a big picture. The West Coast Ocean Data Portal was created in order to increase discovery and connectivity of ocean and coastal data and people to better inform resource management, policy development, and planning on the West Coast. It brings together existing data resources on the West Coast, making them accessible through an easy-to-search catalog, and allowing users to visualize the data sets together through a web mapping application. A little background on how the data portal came to be. It was around 2012 that the West Coast Governors Alliance on Ocean Health held a workshop where the first attempt was made to create a West Coast Ocean Data Network and to describe its missions, goals, and work plan. In 2013, this idea came to fruition because of three enabling conditions. Number one, the conversation had begun on how to handle data coordination and communication. Number two, the broader Coastal Atlas community was beginning to have networking conversations. And importantly, a federal funding opportunity became available. This was the first Regional Ocean Partnership Grant Program, and it meant that the need that had been identified on the West Coast could be acted upon, and thus the portal was able to come into being. So fast forward to the present, and the portal is still growing strong. There have been ups and downs as funding levels have fluctuated. However, the basic building blocks that make up the portal have remained fairly steady. One important thing that has changed is the umbrella organization that brings together the community that we serve. Now known as the West Coast Ocean Alliance, its makeup is more representative than the original West Coast Governors Alliance, as the new organization has included tribal governments from the outset. This structural improvement is significant, and as you can see, it's reflected in the goals of the portal itself. So the primary audience of the West Coast Ocean Data Portal are the participants in the West Coast Ocean Alliance, who are primarily ocean resource managers in federal, state, or tribal governments, with additional participation from local governments, NGOs, and even members of the public when applicable. However, no matter which of these groups we're talking about, all of the participants are members of the community of people committed to improving our collective stewardship of the shared West Coast ocean space. When we set out to create the West Coast Ocean Data Portal, we had a few design criteria in mind, and these have been fairly important to the resulting product. The first of these criteria is that the portal was not designed to replicate any existing functions provided by members of the network. In other words, we wanted to add value to the emerging ecosystem of data providers, and we wanted to provide a location where the products of that ecosystem could be discovered and applied to regional priorities without competing with any of our contributors. This approach began with the building of a data catalog upon which map viewers and other products could be assembled. This approach has turned out to have many strengths, some of which are also potential weaknesses, but overall we feel that it has helped to strengthen our wider community over time. To walk you through the big picture data sharing mechanics, here in the center of the screen, you can see a map of the West Coast geography, overlain with red dots representing contributing organizations. We've highlighted a few organizations from each of the three states as examples with icons. These organizations have specific expertise for their local ocean geographic settings. And they all steward data related to their work. So all that is required for these groups to participate in the data network is for the organization to share metadata records related to their work via the web. This may be done as simply as putting records in a web accessible folder or by hosting a more complex collection management system. On the portal side, administrators simply register these resources and harvest them according to a specified schedule. The harvested records are indexed, stored, and organized via the various portal software components and shared to users via a unified interface that combines the resulting portal catalog with map viewers and other contextual content. To drill down into a few more specifics, once the data records come into the portal from any particular source, a few things happen. First, the portal software itself is smart enough to facet the information by a few parameters automatically. These include the location or data footprint of the data set, the data source, and formats, to name a few. Second, portal staff will perform a manual curation step where we assign records that are most relevant to West Coast thematic priorities to a topic hierarchy that makes it easier for data users to browse and find information that they are looking for. Once a user has used the interface to find some potential data sets that they are interested in, the portal is designed to show a set of standardized information about the data. These include the most commonly requested discovery metadata, such as title, abstract, geography, producers, publishers, dates, etc. All embedded links back to the data owners are preserved in this process, including download links and web service links, which, if present, allow the viewing of the dataset in the associated data viewer. Note that this standard view masks the various metadata formats that come into the portal, and users can simply browse for what they need without being aware of the complexity or diversity of file formats or service formats that the information may be being served in. So most of what I've just described relates to the original catalog concept that the portal was designed around. However, while we began primarily as a catalog, we have since branched out into other areas, with the blue arrow on the left indicating some of the items that we are working on. Items at the top of the list began earlier in our development, and down towards the bottom of the list are some items that we are working on or expect to be working on in the coming few years. I don't have a lot of time to talk about these projects, but I'm happy to answer some questions if anyone is curious. Another dimension of sharing on the West Coast Ocean Data Portal relates to the sharing of our methods and code. Along the way, we have done a reasonably good job of capturing the reasoning behind our design and the methods that a contributor would have to follow in order to become a portal contributor. And most of this information is captured in our online knowledge base. Additionally, all the software employed by the portal itself is open source. And while this has meant that we have benefited from the work of others, it also means that when we have made improvements to the tools, we have contributed those improvements back to the wider community. Examples of where this has worked out particularly well include the layer content management system and map viewer that we use, which is a shared code base with Marco, one of the East Coast Ocean Data portals. And another example would be the catalog software that we use. The topic hierarchy that I mentioned earlier is a piece of functionality that we helped to develop and which Esri was able to incorporate back into the base GeoPortal software. So it can be used by others who employ that same software product. It looks like this. So a few key takeaways. We feel that we have accomplished a lot with a fairly limited amount of resources. We also feel that the relationships built with the portals, within the portal's data sharing community are just as important as the data sharing itself. And that's because these relationships are what allow us to more quickly and accurately react to the challenges that our ocean ecosystem is facing. So now I'd like to take a moment to offer several thank yous to those who help keep the portal running. These include BOEM and NOAA as our current primary sources of funding, and the leadership at the Oregon Coastal Management Program and the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, both of whom supply staff time to help keep the portal up and running. I'd also like to acknowledge the work of our portal development and portal coordination teams, as well as the participating states, tribes, and federal agencies of the West Coast Ocean Alliance. Finally, I'd like to thank EcoTrust for their technical expertise and development work that they've provided us, as well as thank all of the data providers represented in our portal, including the West Coast IUCE regional associations, the National Marine Cadastre, and many others, only some of whom fit on this slide. Last but not least, if you are interested in learning more about either the West Coast Ocean Alliance or the West Coast Ocean Data Portal, here's some contact details. And thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Tanya. The data portal is fantastic, and I have to say we drew a lot of inspiration from it as we were building our own data catalog at my organization. So it's really great to hear some of the more in-depth detail around it. We've got time to take a couple of questions. So if anybody has any questions for Tanya, please do drop them into the chat, and we can pop them to Tanya. So Pierre Luigi asks, are the code bases and documentation being shared centrally? Tanya, I think you're on mute there.
Apologies, double mute.
Yeah.
Yes, I think if I take your question, if I understand your question, we're sharing the knowledge base on the web. So yes, that link was in my slides, and after the questions, I can put it in the chat as well, so you can look at it.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, Pierre Luigi was clarifying slightly by saying across multiple atlases. So I guess
knowledge base.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the contributors to the knowledge base come from the community, particularly those who are participating in the portal dev team conversations, and the docs themselves are, held in GitHub and then served through Read the Docs. So anyone in theory can make a contribution. Whether someone has done that recently outside of the dev team, I'm not sure.
Did that answer your question, Pierre Luigi, or do you want to maybe maybe vocalize the question if it wasn't answered?
Well, no, thanks, Tanya. I mean, thank you, Adam. I think it's fantastic that the documentation and code is exposed so other people can learn from and emulate the same thing. Now, this question comes from the ocean best practices sort of mindset, where we're trying to gather up these related documentation across multiple atlases, and we've seen great examples today. So I'm wondering, can we support you on the IOC UNESCO side, this community, by saying, let's create a community of coastal atlas providers where they can share their code, documentation, etc., and learn from each other? That's what I'm wondering. So what I'm hearing is that currently it's not done. It's mostly whether the individual initiatives share it. And maybe that's something we can pick up with later. But thanks for clarifying, and thank you for sharing all the documentation and code. That's great.
Sure, thank you.
And I think just to come back on that, one of the things that we have done as ICANN is put together some cookbooks, and maybe that's where we can make that link between ICANN as a network and the ocean best practices community.
That could work beautifully, yeah.
Yeah, super, thank you. There was one other question there from Mamadou, I hope I'm saying your name right. Thanking you for the presentation, Tanya, and asking how oceanographic data can be accessed from the portals? Is it linked to from the sites that you mentioned in your presentation?
Yeah, so most of the oceanographic data is held by the contributing organizations, in particular the West Coast IUCE regional associations. There are 3 of them on the West Coast. And whatever those folks share on behalf of their institution, we can pluck from their catalogs those items that are most relevant to the thematic priorities that have been set at the West Coast level by the Ocean Alliance. So we don't try to ingest the entire catalog that they serve, because they serve a lot of data as well. So we try to cherry pick the ones that match the thematic priorities that are set by the Ocean Alliance.
Super. Thanks, Tanya, and thank you everybody for the questions. We're going to